Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. And today we're going to continue our discussion of Genealogy Standards, second edition revised, with a reminder that I do not represent the Board for Certification of Genealogists. I am but a recently renewed associate of the Board for Certification of Genealogists. So today we're going to talk about Standards 46 and 47, evidence independence, and evidence correlation. Standard number 46 is evidence independence. Genealogists weigh evidence from independent information items when information items are related. For example, birth date information from an obituary and death certificate with the same information. Genealogists weigh them only after grouping the related items into a unit. Then they assign that unit no more credibility than the weight of the group's strongest item. See glossary for definition of evidence, independent information items, informant information, primary information, and related information. I always sort of worry about any discussion of weighing of evidence. What we're most interested in is, does everything line up, and do we have as many original sources as necessary? Being able to identify which, in fact, is a derivative source. We always have to know where things come from. So it's likely when we look at birth date information on an obituary that it may or may not be true. But we can probably assume that the birth date found on a birth certificate is. So we can basically now have two records that have the same information. Well, that's fine. And sometimes I think we make a big deal out of weighing of evidence, and it doesn't really mean anything from the perspective of, does it in fact support your hypothesis or not? So the concept of genealogists weigh them only after grouping the related items into a unit. Well, what's a unit? Everything has to correlate together. Everything has to agree. And if they don't, you have to explain why they don't. But the fact that you have 16 documents that all say the same thing, that doesn't mean anything if none of them are original records. What you're having to deal with is the concept of not weighing a record, but the probability that the record is correct. Now, some people may say that's the same thing, but in my mind, when you weigh something, it gives you the idea that something is better than something else. And we know that one record standalone doesn't count. We know that more records together do count, but we also know that some records can be based on false information to begin with. Recognize that each record needs to stand by itself, but each record needs to stand together with everybody else in order for you to have a correct assertion. So this leads us to standard number 47, which is evidence correlation. Genealogists test their evidence by comparing and contrasting evidence items. They use such correlation to discover parallels, patterns, and inconsistencies, including points at which evidence items agree, conflict, or both. This is the important piece. It's important that evidence be independent, as in 46, but 47 is where the real answer is. If you don't compare and contrast your various pieces, you can't come to any conclusion that will stand the test of time. Correlation means we compare things together and we look for things that are consistent. We look for patterns, and we also look not so much for inconsistencies as we do conflicts. Inconsistencies become conflicts. And we, of course, have to resolve those, because otherwise somebody later will resolve them for us and may come to a different conclusion than we do. We're looking for things that agree. Yay! We're looking for things that conflict. That also could be a yay, but more likely not. Or both. Now, how does something agree and conflict and be both? Well, a death certificate is a good example, where it says one thing in one place in the death certificate and another thing in another place, And you can find agreement in part of something, but not agreement in the rest. And I think I forgot to see the C glossary part for definition of conflicting evidence, correlation, and evidence. I hope you all are going back to the glossary every once in a while and taking a look at those words that are back there. So today we've talked about evidence independence. It's not one of my favorite standards from the perspective of being useful, just because of how I look at records. They have to learn to stand alone, but they have to learn to stand together. And evidence correlation, probably one of the most important standards. Things have to relate. Things have to correlate. I'm not really sure what a parallel is, but I understand the concept of patterns. My favorite example of patterns, I think, is everybody in the family a sweet potato farmer or a white potato farmer. You know, the sweet potato farmers would do things one way and the white potato farmers would do something maybe not so much different, but different enough to establish a pattern and a difference between the two. Other patterns might be, what religion does a Quaker become if there are no Quakers? And there's a pattern there. They generally become Methodists. Look for patterns, look for parallels, whatever those are, things that go side by side, but especially look for things that are inconsistent, and especially look for things that agree, but recognize that because things agree doesn't necessarily mean they are correct. So this has been Craig. This has been Just Genealogy, and we are moving on down the road. Thank you so much. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Only about a quarter of you are subscribers. Appreciate subscribers a lot. Tell your friends. We're now more than halfway through the standards, and we'll keep plugging along and keep watching. Appreciate watchers too. Thank you so much.